Good evening, students. Welcome to Dr. Kalam IAS Academy. We'll continue with the class. Like I always thought of taking case studies every day, but some time was not available. We'll start in the beginning itself. Before that, let me ask you some questions with respect to some of the things what we have already studied. So what do you understand by these terms which we have already dealt? First, to begin with, what do you understand by bureaucracy? Very important term. What do you understand by bureaucracy?
It is the steel frame of governance, sir.
Again, it is?
It is the steel frame of governance.
Okay. Steel frame of governance. Then
Another one could be it is a rigid framework for rendering public services.
rigid framework. Okay. For rendering public services. Then any other meaning? See if it is given like for 10 marks, 15 marks, or 20 marks, what you will write?
It is a network of intergovernmental, interdepartmental cooperation in government services.
Okay. Interdepartmental cooperation. Okay. Any other? Okay. Pawan, would you like to say anything? Akhil? Okay. Can anyone explain the terms among these 8? Any one of the 8?
So values are what are important for the society.
Okay. Okay.
Values attached to any object forms attitude.
Okay. Very good. Okay.
Values in public service is probity.
Values in public service is probity. Okay. Then
The ability of future is aptitude.
ability of
Future.
future, it will be wrong. Then future potential, we can say.
Yes, yeah.
Then anyone?
Non-deviation from established principles is integrity.
Not deviation from.
Non-deviation from established principles.
Okay. Then any other one?
A set of principles is forms ethics.
Set of principles. Okay. Then
Ethics for the collective benefit forms morals.
okay. Ethics for collective benefit. Okay. Where did you get this? Like, how did you take this one? I have not mentioned this.
Like, sir, my general understanding.
Then
Not sure about eighth, sir. I think apart from that,
emotional intelligence means,
okay, emotional intelligence.
okay, emotional intelligence means it is using your emotions for your benefit.
Yes,
So using our emotions for our benefit, emotional intelligence includes the behaviors, the emotions in you and also others. So emotional intelligence doesn't refer only to you. It refers to other emotions, others' emotions also. That is the reason it becomes very important in communicating the things. Communication, persuasion from all the perspective. Okay. Anyone? You have to study a lot, my dear students, because these are the basic things. If the things are not clear, like you can't move forward. Simply, like I can finish everything very fast because conceptual part I have dealt with. We have to go through and like you have to be thorough with the things. Values are those which are important. To put it more concrete, preferences which are important are values. If these preferences are important for individual, then individual value. If it is important for society, societal value. Organization, organizational value. Among the values, there are some values which will be in the form of standards. Values which are in the form of standards. These are known as your morals and ethics. Standards at the societal level is your ethics. Standards at the individual level is your morals. Values, if they are attached to any object, tied to an object, it becomes your attitude. Next, when you follow values on a consistent basis, it is your integrity. In a more formalized sense, it is probability. Right? These are the things which you have to understand. Next, forward. With respect to bureaucracy, what do you understand by bureaucracy? A very important concept. Once again, anyone? Priya madam, can you answer? What do you understand by bureaucracy? Let me answer this question for you. Bureaucracy is a concept. This concept is a ideal type. Means ideal type means it won't exist in reality. What is this concept all about? It's a concept for administration of big organization. Administration of big organizations. But when the concept developed like some 100 years back, then the only big organizations present were your government organizations. So it is synonymously used with the government organization, right? It is synonymously used with the government organization. Here's what are the characteristics? Here there should be hierarchy. There should be merit system. There should be open competition for recruitment. There should be strict discipline. There should be strict supervision and control. The people who are working in bureaucracy, for them it is a sole job, and there is a career in that, in the way of promotions because of seniority and also merit. See, all these things are important for the administration of any big organization, right? Bureaucracy refers to administration of any big organization. It is like a concept ponded. Say, for example, how to get first rank. I have come up with one thesis, some framework, some things. You have to do this, you shouldn't do this. Then you will get service. This may be by going to coaching or not going to coaching. For getting civil service, you should do something. If you don't do those things, you won't get civil service. Similarly, any big organizations are managed by bureaucratic principles, bureaucratic characteristics. All big organizations need this, right? This is one important thing. Next is with respect to the previous case study. We'll discuss that. Before that, let me discuss you this case study. This is a very important, and most often, like around 30 to 40% of the questions in case study revolves around this concept, right? When someone offers you bribe, what are the options available? Say, for example, you are a government employee. If someone offers bribe to do some things, what you will do? What are the options available? Anyone? Okay. Let me give you a very, very important concept here. Say, for example, you are an individual. You have got 1,000 rupees. Two of your friends ask for 1,000 money, A and B. In this, you will say that, no, I don't have money or I can't give to B, but you will give to A. These are equally your friends. Can we consider this as corruption? On the other hand, take another case where you are a government employee. Two people, the same, A and B, are entitled for that service, but there is chance of giving to only one. In this scenario, person A gives you some bribe, some money. So you will give that product or service to A. Can we call this as bribe? Can we call this as corruption?
Yes, it is classic case of corruption.
Then what is the difference between here and there? Say, for example, here also, like A told something like, I will help you in future. Something like that. I will give you, if you give 1,000, I'll give 1,010 rupees.
It is my personal money, so there is no concept of bribe here. In the second case, it is government money. So
Yes.
government or government project.
So the concept of corruption arises here. Here you are given some power. Here you are given some power and authority. Authority because of that position. So when you are in an organization, by virtue of being in that organization, you will be having some powers. These powers have to be exercised according to the principles of that organization. If you are not following this, then it can be called as corruption. In this case, also same. But it is your personal thing. You have got the complete control over this 10,000 rupees or 1,000 rupees. You are the sole owner. On the other hand, it's not the case. It's maybe the public money, maybe the institution money. When that is not yours, or when you personally don't have the authority, or you are not owning that, that is corruption. Is this clear? So corruption comes when you are acting in a way which you should not act you should act according to the principles of the organizations, but you are acting other way. Okay, dear students, what are the options available to you when someone offers you bribe? Here you can take a broader picture. You have to take a broader picture, then we'll classify it. Who is offering bribe? If he is your family member, if he is your family member, or someone related to your private relations, where you have private relationship. On the other hand, you are in public relation, or any general public. Here, not family, it is general, any general public. At the same time, bribe is offered in a professional, from someone who is in professional life. In this also, once again, bribe is offered by an individual, maybe private, maybe from with respect to the private company, or when it is there in a government organization. Here too, in both the cases, bribe may be offered by your junior or your senior. Are you getting me? So this is one of the most important case study which has been recurring time and again. So here there is someone who is offering bribe. You are an officer. You may be in government organization or in private organization, but you are in a professional life. When there is a thing, when you have to take the person who is asking for help, or you can take, if not bribe, asking for help or pressurizing you, is someone from your family, friends, relatives, or the general public, or your senior or your junior, what you will do? This is one important thing. In the same scenario, you can come up with another thing. There, when some of the people in your private life are acting unethically, they are acting unethically. They are not following the ethical standards, or they are not following the law. Same here. They are not following the ethical standards or not following any law, things like that. Same here also. Your junior is not following the organizational principles. Your senior is not following them. In this regard, what you will do? Dear students, This is a very, very important thing. As I told you, if you add the second type also, nearly 50% of your ethics case studies are revolving around this. This is the basic structure you should keep in mind, right? Okay. Once again, I'll brush the things, and you please take it as a homework or assignment, and you have to come up with all the options possible. If someone offers you bribe or asks for some favors, if they are from your private relations, family, friends, what are the options? If there is anyone individual from general public in your public relations, what will you do? If there is the same thing offering bribe or favors from any private organization, what you will do? If the same is done in your own organization by your junior or senior, what will you do? That is one homework. Homework number two is, if you find that some of the members in your private relations are involved in unethical behavior or not following the law, what you will do? The same here. The same here. These are the two things on which you have to deliberate, and you have to come up with options. The more options you come up with, the better it is. After you coming up with the option, you have to say which are the better ones, right? Having
Sir,
said this, please go ahead.
sir, can I give this? Yes, sir. Sir, about the giving the option. Sir, can I give this option based on all the possible consequences that could come if I accept this bribe, something like that? So, for
Yes,
example,
that you
like
have to give. That is the reason, like, not only giving options, you have to give the pros and cons of that one. For
sir, for
all the
example,
things, okay.
if the person that is offering me this bribe, if he is someone who is very powerful, then mostly declining the such offer could land me in some great complications. So should I write it like that, sir? So likely I may accept this bribe, but not likely fulfill what the conditions that he is putting forth. Is that an option that is available,
Yes,
sir?
yes. On all these things, what UPSC asking is, what are the options available? And please mention the merits and demerits. In that regard, you have to go for a tabulated kind of answer. Say, if you say, in this case, yes, what is the positive you'll be getting? What is the negative you'll be getting? Both the things you have to say. Say option number one, family member. If you reject that, or if you punish them, your family relations will be spoiled. If you somehow take the bribe and do the needful for them, so you'll be well appreciated. These things you have to mention. After that, since I am a duty conscious person, or based on the principles available, this is the one which I will be taking. This option is the one I am putting into action. For all the options, you have to come up with merits and demerits. For all the options, you should have the merits and demerits plus and negative. But you should exactly mention which one you have to follow. Right? Okay, let me give you the whole case study for you itself. This I have already explained to you. You have joined as a junior to a director. He is very, very good person. But when you went to home, this is the thing happened. When you are about to ring the bell, you heard shouting noise, and also constantly there were disturbing noise, women crying. Next day, you are compelled to inquire further into the office, and you find that your boss is involved in domestic violence, he is beating up. In this regard, what will you do? Please give me the answers. You have to come up with the answers. For me, like I have told many times, once again, I'll tell in your batch, it's not the thing. You have to develop that skill. Okay. Let me take this opportunity and let me just explain you in this kind of thing what you have to do. See here, in all these cases, there is indirect evidence that he is involved in domestic violence. Number one. Along with that, you will have to consider one more thing. Has given in the passage, is a very good person. Is a very good person in office. But there is an allegation or a kind of thing which is not proved or which is still to be proved. In this regard, he is involved in domestic violation. Since he is very good personally to you, you cannot blindly take for granted that he is doing the thing. That woman who is crying, she may be crying because she has some agony, she has some diseases, maybe she is suffering from some incurable disease. Any reason. Maybe she is not like she is psychologically ill. So the first thing you have to say that one cannot be ethical, one cannot be very good in public life, and he cannot be very bad in private life. Both are interrelated. There are high chances that a person who is ethical, who is following the moral standards in public life will also follow in private life. So I would like to verify, I would like to know exactly what is the reason. First of all, what you have to do is to find what is the exact reason, what is the exact problem. See here, once the problem is confirmed, once the problem you are zeroed down, you have seen your boss hitting and your boss says the reasons. This is the thing, that is the reason it's happening. Then afterwards, you have choices. First of all, you have to get clarity of the thing. If it is, your boss is not involved in domestic violence, you will try to solve the problem by, like, your boss wife is crying. On the other hand, if your boss is involved in domestic violence, then you have to pursue your boss to solve this problem. You have to increase your rapport. You have to spend more time with your boss. You have to know more facts about your boss. If you can change, then it's well and good. If it is not possible, you have to report this to appropriate authority. Right? See, let me once again give you a glimpse of the thing. Government office working as an assistant to the director of your, since you have joined recently, you need his support. Your superior is very kind, ready to train, and also he is intelligent, well informed, see, very kind person. You have been respecting him, right? But this has happened. In this regard, first of all, you want to confirm what exactly the reason is. The reason is that he is very kind to me in office. So there are chances that there may be some reasons, or you want to know the correct reason. After that, if he is not involving, or that wife is having some other problem, trying to solve that. After that, no, your boss is involved in domestic violence because she is ignorant for many reasons. Then you have to pursue, and there can be always a win-win strategy. If that is not the case, you can go and tell him to report that to authority. Here you cannot, one of the thing is you cannot directly tell the things to authority, because you have got a moral responsibility also with this person, right? This is the way you have to write this. Okay, please go through all these things. For all the definitions, all the concepts, you should have 1 or 2 word definition for these things, right? These are some of the things we have discussed already. Let me not like I thought of once revising these things. Let me go in brief. Yes, here. See here, government includes structures and processes, and also it includes norms, values, rules. So governance is about culture, institutions, everything. There are many things which are involved, which cannot be easily observed. Is this things clear to you? On the other hand, your government is a structure. Your government is an instrument. On the other hand, governance is a very broader term. It is an all-encompassing thing. It includes mechanisms, it includes processes, everything. It includes norms, values, rules. So there are many things which cannot be directly visible in your governance. That is one important thing. Then with respect to the concept of good governance as a concept evolved as a aid conditionality prescribed by the International Lending Organization. To begin with, this was the meaning, but now it has changed to quality of governance, or good governance can be seen as strengthening the democratic values and ethos. Anything leading to increase in the quality of the governance, anything leading to strengthening the democratic values, then you can say that that is good governance. Is this clear? To begin with, it started as a condition for giving aid, but over a time it has reached to the point where anything related to increasing or improving or maximizing the quality of governance and strengthening the democratic values can be taken as good governance. Then the concept is not new. It was been taught in Kautilya's Arthashastra, Mahatma Gandhi's Swaraj. These are some of the qualities with respect to good governance: transparency, responsibility, responsiveness, accountability, then rule of law, consensus oriented, equality, equity, following the rule of law, everything. Barriers of good governance, attitude of civil servants, lack of accountability, red tapeism, lack of or low awareness of the rights and duties, ineffective implementation of laws. Similarly, there are some preconditions, there are some tools, and also there is a need of an institution. There is a need of institutionalizing the best practices. For that, we have to come up with a organization, institution, and also we have to come up with a good governance index. Without the index, we will be making subjective claims. We cannot compare to someone or something. In the absence of any index, only indirect conclusion can be drawn about the standards of governance. So you should have the standards of governance, which will be in the form of index, right? According to second ARC, good governance is nothing but your ethical governance. Good governance is nothing but ethical governance. But in that, rule of law and absence of corruption are directly significant in the context of ethical governance. Rule of law and absence of corruption. The reason for this is, here ethics is related to corruption. If there is corruption, there cannot be ethics in governance. Corruption is there means it is an important manifestation of a failure of ethics. Ethics has failed, Afterwards, it has manifested into a form that is known as corruption. So how to stop the corruption? When there is rule of law. And also when there is no bribe giving or corruption. Right? Here we have to move from business ethics to ethics in business. Ethics in governance includes everything: private organization, public organization, corporates, and also what is ethics with respect to that business is not the thing. Ethics in the business, not business ethics. Foundational value. These are some of the very, very important things. In this, we have discussed values, code of ethics, and code of conduct. With respect to the civil service values or the foundational values, these are the values or ethical standard that a civil servant should imbibe. These are the values which reflect the public expectations. These are the values which are expected from the public citizens. So with respect to political impartiality and also maintaining highest ethical standards and accountability for action. These are the foundational values. Why these are called foundational values? Because these are expected in you as a civil servant from the people. As I shown you, the complete recommendations have been put under your aptitude and foundational values. This is with respect to draft foundational broader one, code of ethics within that, code of conduct within that. My dear students, there was civil service code which was been proposed by second ARC. In this code, at the apex you should have values, in middle you should have code of ethics, at the bottom or the third level you should have code of conduct. All should be given statutory backing. Statutory backing means it has to be by the legislature, means an act or law should be formed. That is new civil service law. They want to put all these things in civil service law. When it is put in civil service law, there is a statutory backing. Right? Broad principles which govern the behavior of the civil servant is code of ethics. What people expect from a civil servant? Foundational values. Broad principles which govern the behavior of the civil servant. Broad principles, very, very important. I stress upon broad principles which govern the behavior of the civil servant. Precise, unambiguous things which are related to behavior and action, then it is code of conduct. Code of ethics means broad principles which govern the behavior of a civil servant. Precise, unambiguous, acceptable and unacceptable behaviors and actions is your code of conduct. So in India, we have got only code of conduct, but around the world, foundation value, code of ethics is also present. As of now, we don't have prescribed civil service values on code of ethics. They may be in the form of convictions, but as prescribed in a list, in a law, in a rules, no. There was a first attempt in 2007 in the form of Public Service Bill. This is still a draft bill. It has been not passed. It is under the consideration of Ministry of Personnel. It recommended for the first time public service values or civil service values and code of ethics. Lately, second ARC, it also says that there should be civil service values and code of ethics, and these should be given statutory backing by including them in civil service law. Right? They have to be included in civil service law. Constitution, law, and rules. Similarly, your values, code of ethics, code of conduct. Status, we have got code of conduct prescribed for civil servant. This is the one, but you can see they have been not given statutory backing. Please internalize, code of conduct is in the form of rules, means in the form of executive resolutions. They are not in the form of statutory backing. They are not in the form of things like act. The same thing, Civil Service Conduct Act. If it is was there, then it becomes statutory backing. Act comes only when a draft bill is introduced, passed by both the houses, and get the assent of the president. Then the bill becomes an act. With respect to rules, there is no need of all these formalities. Your council of minister or a minister can come up with the rules. So for the central civil service, this is the one, Central Civil Service Conduct Rules. Analogous rules applicable to employees in various states. Here they will be having, say for example, Telangana Civil Service Conduct Rules, some date. Similarly, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka. So this is with respect to central and state services. There is one which is common to both all India services. For them, different conduct rules are there. These are in the form of code of conduct. Second ARC says that we have got an elaborate civil service code of conduct, but there are some shortcomings and anomalies. You have to rewrite the things by taking into consideration the foundational values and the code of ethics which we have prescribed, which the second ARC has prescribed. Most countries which have reformed have civil service values and ethics also. Example, New Zealand, Australia, and UK. In Australia, there is a statutory backing. This is the one which has been taken as the basis for the new civil service law propounded by second ARC. In Australia, they have given statutory backing by law. Means there will be something known as Civil Service Act. So this is the case. In India also we have been prescribed the same one, but there are many countries where the constitution itself prescribes the foundational values, civil service value. That is your Polish. Right? All the countries around the world have code of conduct. There can be no profession without code of conduct. It is a universal thing. Please internalize here. What is the need of foundational values, code of ethics for civil service? What is the need of code of conduct for civil service? What is the need of new civil service law which is being proposed, or the draft public service bill which has been proposed? Dear students, here I'll make the difference. Till then, please use the civil service and public service interchangeably, not a problem. Civil service bill, public service bill. There are some differences, I will let you know. What is the need of these things? Civil service code, which I have already explained. Okay, here, please let me take this part of the board. Say, for example, one individual, a government employee, cannot marry more than one spouse. It is a code of conduct. Is there any doubt with respect to this? A government servant cannot have more than one spouse. It is clear. There is no ambiguity. It is unambiguous, precise. But one officer, or there is one individual who is following the law in word. This is the law. This is the thing which has been the principle. He is following those things in letter. Means he is not marrying more than one spouse, maybe one husband or one wife, but he is having immoral relation with more than many people. What do you say for this? According to code of conduct, a government official cannot have more than one spouse. There is an individual X. He is following that. He has not married more than one. In fact, you think he has not married itself, but he is having immoral relations with many individuals. Here, why I say this is with respect to why we should leave foundational values and code of ethics. We need code of conduct because there has to be there has to be something precise and unambiguous. Why we should have code of conduct? because there should be something which is precise and ambiguous in the form of do's and don'ts. At the same time, when it is precise and unambiguous, some individual may follow this in letter, but may not follow this in principle. So you should have one more broader thing encompassing the thing. That becomes your civil service ethics, code of ethics. One circle up above that, that is your civil service values. So when you have code of ethics and also civil service values, you will be having a bigger one. Is this concept clear to you? So integrity is a very broad term. Values, as I told, they are very abstract. They're all encompassing. To prevent individuals from just following the things, following the rules to letter, but not in spirit. You should have something broader than those things. They are in the form of your code of ethics, and also they are in the form of your civil service values. Right? Why there is a need of civil service law? This is important. As of now, most of the countries which have refined, which has reformed the civil service have civil service law, which is given by the legislature or they are present in the constitution itself. And also there is no prescribed list of values and code of ethics now. All these things should be present in one area. So there is a need of new civil service law. Right. Although all citizens are subjected to the laws of the land, in the case of civil servants, there must be standards of behavior more stringent than those of an ordinary citizens. Why? You know the reasons? One is with respect to the power they have, and also the authority, the scope, the breadth, the impact it makes on the whole society. On the other hand, the power what he has is by virtue of he being in the civil service. Here, authority, what he is exercising is because of this position, not individually. Here, because of this power, all these things, he has to follow certain things, and also he is following certain things that is in the form of characteristics of bureaucracy. He is following the principles of bureaucracy. On the other hand, in a bigger society, see, he is a bureaucrat. Bureaucrat is a part of the organization, part of the government, and also is a part of the society. So as a part of society, he has to follow certain rules and regulations, certain principles, and at the same time, since he is a part of bureaucracy, he is having powers at his disposal. He is having a power which is not his own. It is because he is working in the organization, he is working in the bureaucracy. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. To prevent that, they should be having more stringent behavioral norms. Did you get this point? Let me once again explain this. A student, a IAS officer is a part of society, is a citizen of India. At the same time, he is also a part of bureaucracy, part of government bureaucracy. Because of that, he has got certain powers. He has got some authority and also responsibility with respect to the people. When he is simply a part of society, he won't be having that authority and responsibility. The authority and responsibility as a general citizen is different. But when he is working in the bureaucracy, by virtue of he being the part of that, he has to follow certain bureaucratic principles. Two reasons here: he has to follow the bureaucratic principles, and also since he is in bureaucracy, he has got a lot of authority and responsibility. Because of that, there is a need of more stringent norms. Right? These are important things. Then, dear students, as of now, we have discussed that ethics is equal to set of standards or set of principles. Please internalize the things. You can use either of these things. Do you find any difference between the terms standard and principle? Say, for example, 1 kg weight is a standard, or 6 feet is a standard for human beings, standard height. So anything below that we can call him as short. Anything more than that we can call tall. So this is a standard. On the other hand, with respect to principle, you have to be honest. There is a normative thing here. With respect to principle, there is a normative thing. It says what is good. Here, it is providing you only a standard. When comparing to a standard, we can come to conclusion as right or wrong. Riding the bicycle on the left-hand side is the standard. So if you are riding on the left-hand side, you are right. If you are not, you are wrong. So the standard gives a framework for your comparison. On the other hand, principles tell you what is good. What is good? Please differentiate here. Say, for example, Ramu is a good boy. Ramu is a right boy. That is the difference here. So this is a deep thing. Don't bother about. You can use the things interchangeably. So you can say them set of standards or set of principles. Right? Then please tell me, then what is the supreme ethical standard? What you consider is the supreme ethical standard. I said that ethics refers to the standards or the principles set by the society. So what should be the basis for this? Anyone?
Constitution.
Constitution. Okay, not correct. On what basis the ethical standards of the society depend? Or what are the criteria to consider something as ethical?
People's mindset.
Mindset. Like how? Can you elaborate a little if possible?
Its
People
impact.
usually
Please come again.
people usually judge others by their mindset.
Voice was not clear.
Sir,
Anyone? Madam.
sir, they are the most accepted views of the society.
Yes, very good. Really, it's the correct thing. What is the basis for that most accepted thing?
The consequences, that means the end of the views.
Ends. So ends are the things which are determining, you are saying.
Yeah, and what the means, that means the main concept of the views.
Okay, means. Okay. Then
Collective betterment.
collective betterment. Okay. We have got ethics. Society puts some standards, tell some principles for the better survival of the society. Society as a whole has to prosper. Maximizing good for society. For that, what is that basis? Why we have ethics? We have ethics to see that all the people in the society are better off, to make the society a better place to live. Why we have got ethical standards? We have got ethical standards for the survival, for the perpetuation, to make the society a better place. Then what is the basis for this one? Say, for example, you say that stealing is bad. Why you say that stealing is bad? You say that like philanthropy or being honest are good. Why you say that? Because you want to make society a better place to live. If all started stealing, what will happen? So for this, my dear students, I already told you the basis for these ethical standards are threefold. For considering anything, the basis for ethical standard is threefold. One school of thought says that ethics is located in the ends. Ethics is located in the consequences of the actions, results of the actions. These can be known as consequentialists. Ventesh, please mute your phone. These are known as consequentialists. Outcomes, results, or consequences. Venkatesh, Suresh, please mute your phone. If the consequences are good, then we can call that as ethics. At least concerned about the means through which you are doing. If you are helping, if you are helping poor, it's good, ethical. From where you are bringing money? Are you working at Kalam IAS Academy or you are looting the management? It is immaterial. That is your consequentialism. Very important. Please don't misunderstand. Understand the concept. For a consequentialist, there is no this part. That means individual virtues. All these things are not at all present. For them, the consent is. For them, the only thing present is consequence. They are looking into consequences, the results, the outcomes, the ends. So they are also known as teleological. In that, there is one important thing, that is utilitarianism, which is propounded by Bentham. This is one part. You forget about this. You erase this part. There is another school of thought, that is deontology. Deon means duty. Means here what they are saying, you apply correct means. The means should be the important things. Let the outcome be negative. Let the outcome be neutral. Let the outcome be positive. It is immaterial. You follow the rules. You follow the means. That is enough. In that, very important is categorical imperative, which is propounded by Immanuel Kant, German philosopher. Next, these are the two contemporary thoughts which are well accepted. Next is a very, very old thought, virtues. Excellence of a character. If a person has a excellent character, then he will definitely do the correct thing. He will definitely follow the correct means. He will definitely have the correct end. Is it clear? For a person who is talking about ethics is located in virtues, he says that a person who is having good character does the things which are ethical. There also they are not concerned about the means or end. They are concerned with the character present of an individual. In that, your Plato's cardinal virtues is a very, very important thing. Right? What is the supreme ethical standard? What is the basis for ethics? Basis for ethics is these three things. And the latest is with respect to the human relations. Here previously in ancient time they refers to as character, but here we are giving more importance to the liberty. Liberty means simply take it as freedom. Anything which is maximizing the freedom, individual freedom, is ethical. Anything which is maximizing the individual freedom, at the same time not coming in the way of others' freedom, that is ethical. People should be allowed to do whatever they want. Whatever they want. Anything and everything they can do. The only limitation for their freedom is it should not come in the way of others' freedom. Don't you feel this is appealing to you? Whether you are taking good means, bad means, ends, immaterial. Is it allowing you to do whatever you want? Anything. But the only restriction is it should not come in the way of others' liberty. You should be allowed to swing your arms the way you want. Run the way you want. But your swinging of arms should not hit anyone. Should not come in the way of their freedom, their liberty. The another thing is with respect to the contracts what we make. We should abide by the contracts because we are living in a society. When we are living in a society, we have got some mutual understanding in the form of contract that should be obeyed. These are the basis. Today, let me elaborate the teleological or the consequentialism in detail. Teleological ethics, according to teleological ethics, morality of an action is contingent on the actions, outcomes, and result. Morality of an action, ethicality of an action depends upon the outcome or the result, end or the goal. Is this clear? Morally right action is one that produces good outcome or the consequences. If there is anything which is producing good outcome, good output, good result, good consequence, good telo, then it is ethical. This should be the supreme ethical standard. Anything which is producing good outcome, it may be, that is ethical. The means are secondary. The end result is what? That which must be considered before determining the morality of a decision. The means through which you are attending anything, the means which you are using, they are secondary. They're not considered. But the outcome, end result, consequences is that which must be considered before determining the ethicality of a decision. In this direction, we have got two schools of thought. As I told you, utilitarianism, most accepted, the classical representative of the whole thought. Hedonism, egotism, aestheticism, altruism, negative consequentialism. Here, one thing you have to consider, the difference between hedonism and the utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is talking about maximizing, the output or the consequence for the whole society. It is taking the society as a whole. It is taking the aggregate. On the other hand, your hedonism refers to maximizing the consequences or outputs with respect to individuals. Is this clear to you? Utilitarianism is a concept at the societal level. Hedonism is a concept referring to the individual. That is the only difference. Both are consequentialist theories. Utilitarianism, an action is right if it leads to the most happiness of the greatest number of people. Happiness means maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain. The central tenet says that an action is right if it leads to the most happiness of the greatest number. Means if this is a society, if it is leading to the most happiness, a very high happiness of the greatest number, large number, greatest happiness of the greatest number of people, or most happiness of the greatest number of people, not the least. It should have, because it is talking about societal things. Means, say for example, there are 1,000 people here. In this, say for example, something is giving most happiness to the great number, means for 90% of the people, for 90 people, it is giving most happiness. For 10, it is giving, okay, the other way around. No, it's not giving happiness, the opposite of happiness it is giving. So when you sum up, it is leading to the maximizing of happiness. So it is sum total of all pleasures and pains in the society. Right? Hedonism, pleasure is the most important pursuit of the mankind, and individuals should strive to maximizing their total pleasure. See here, very important difference between hedonism and also your utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is talking about happiness, maximizing happiness. Happiness is equal to add pleasure, subtract pain, or the net effect. But in hedonism, we are concentrating on the pleasure part more. And also it is individual thing. Pleasure is the most important pursuit of the mankind, and individuals should strive to maximize their own total pleasure. Here, societal total pleasure in utilitarianism. Individual total pleasure is with respect to hedonism. Next, egoism. An action is right if It maximizes good of the self. It licenses actions which are good for the individual but determinantal to the general welfare. Here, the only thing you are taking into consideration in egoism is the individual, maximizing the individual good. At the same time, here you are not bothered or you are licensing yourself some of the actions which are determinantal to the general welfare. Here we have added one more thing, that is general welfare. An action is right if it is maximizes good of the self. If it licenses actions which are good for individuals but determinantal to the general welfare in egoism. Aestheticism. See, these are just for your understanding. Questions won't come from these things. A life characterized by, you will be getting questions from hedonism and utilitarianism. Utilitarianism most important, in few cases hedonism. Aestheticism, a life characterized by absence from the egoistic pleasures. When you are acting against or trying to abstain from the egoistic pleasures, that too for achieving spiritual goals. Say you might have observed saints, they go to forest. Why they go to forest? Have you ever thought of that? This is the things. So aestheticism, why do saints go to forest? Because they want a life characterized by subsistence from the egoistic pleasures, and also this is in the direction of achieving the spiritual goals. All the egoistic pleasures they want to abstain from, so they don't want to stay in a society which may provoke them. They want to live in a place where all these things, the egoistic pleasure things, won't come to their mind, so that they can achieve the spiritual goal. Altruism is a very, very important thing. Here, this person does everything good to the society, but not to the individual. An individual take actions that have best consequences for everyone except himself. Altruism was coined by the French philosopher Auguste Comte, live for others. So what is altruism? Here, altruism is living for others, a very, very important thing. In all the things, what was the center? Center was individual. If not that, a greater thing, society was the thing. But in altruism, you are giving more importance to society at the cost even for the individual. Living for others. Individual take actions that have best consequences for everyone except himself. Here, what is the thing? To have better consequences, he is suffering. But in the better consequences, in making others happy, in making others good, there is something which he is getting. So for that, his suffering is not suffering. In making others happy, he is finding some happiness. You can take the other way. Right? Living for others. Negative consequentialism, here it focuses on minimizing bad consequences rather than promoting good consequences. This is also a very important construct. In all the cases, we are thinking of maximizing, promoting good consequences. But here, the focus is on minimizing bad consequences. That is negative consequentialism. If you are involved in minimizing the consequences, bad consequences, then negative consequentialism. So what is consequentialism? Consequentialism is one which locates ethics in consequences. The important theory is utilitarian theory. It was given by Jeremy Bentham, an English moral philosopher, legal reformer. He gave the doctrine of utilitarianism. It is a true representative of the consequentialism or teleology. Main idea is supreme ethical standard is to maximize happiness. So supreme ethical standard is to maximize happiness. So here maximizing happiness is the output. What is the output? They are taking happiness as the output. Anything which is maximizing happiness is the supreme ethical standard. Then you may ask me why Bentham has taken happiness as the supreme ethical standard. The reason is we are all made up of, we are all governed by pain and pleasure. Pain and pleasure. We all want to have more pleasure. We want to have less pain in every aspect. Each and every action of an individual, future action of an individual, also the past action of an individual are related to pleasure and pain. Say for example, now you are listening to the class. You feel that by getting the knowledge, you'll be getting IAS. There may be painful things, sitting, watching, hearing. So here, every aspect is governed by pleasure and pain. Bentham has taken the consequentialist approach in that he is focusing on happiness, because happiness is the byproduct of, happiness is the result of pleasure over pain. Why, once again, why you have taken pleasure and pain? Because we are governed by these things. All individuals, whatever we are doing is with respect to these parameters. Right thing to do, whatever maximizing utility. So what is utilitarian? Right thing to do, the ethical thing to do, the just thing to do is that which maximizing utility. So what is utility? Utility, whatever produces pleasure and whatever prevents pain or suffering. What is the supreme ethical standard according to utilitarianism? To maximize utility. What is utility? Utility is that whatever which produces more pain, which produces more pleasure, and which prevents pain, suffering, right? Why maximizing happiness is a supreme ethical standard? Why maximizing utility is the supreme ethical standard? Because we are governed by pain and pleasure. Pain and pleasure are our sovereign masters. Pain and pleasure determine what we ought to do, what we will do, what we have done. Don't you agree with this? Is there anyone who want to have only pain? You don't want any pleasure? Is there anyone who want to be sorrow always? In this regard, we have seen the example. In the ancient Greece, they used to throw Christian to the lion in the Colosseum for amusement, in the stadium for amusement. According to Bentham, it is giving maximum happiness. The sum total of pleasure and pain is high in the direction of happiness. So it is ethical. In the city of happiness, one child was confined to or locked in a room, because if this girl comes out, the whole happiness of the city will vanish. According to Bentham, according to utilitarianism, according to consequentialism, it is ethical. Lifeboat case, when there was no other alternative, instead of all the four dying, If they kill one and 3 will survive, because one is suffering, others are happy. So it is ethical. So legislators, according to Bentham, what is the ethical policy? If we add up all the benefits and subtract all the costs, it should produce more happiness than the alternatives, right? It's a very important thing with respect to examination. From the utilitarian point of view, if you are argued to do, then say for example, there are some 4 policies, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is producing, there are 1,000 people. This is producing pain and also pleasure in all the individuals, all the 1,000 individuals. When you sum up all the pains and pleasures given by each of the policy, where you have got net happiness, which produces more happiness, you take that. It is immaterial if 5 are suffering. It is immaterial even 600 are suffering. But it is giving maximum happiness when compared to others. Among all the alternative, there is one alternative which is giving more happiness. You take it. Is this clear to you? So the legislator, the lawmakers should make those laws which give maximum happiness. Say for example, think that this is a river, building a dam. Because of this, you may rehabilitate or you may uproot some of the tribal people, maybe 100 in number. But after building the dam, you are able to irrigate 20,000 square kilometers, square area irrigation. By taking into this into consideration, you have to take those things. Say for example, there is another law. Here, this law is giving maximum happiness to people. At the same time, it is causing some environmental pollution. So when you take the thing, the maximum happiness is the one which you have to consider. Any policy which is giving more happiness, greatest happiness, or the most happiness of the greatest number, most happiness of the greatest number is the one which you have to take into consideration. Hey, this is a very, very interesting example. So please do concentrate and please do give your inputs. What will you do, beggars? What is the best way? What is the ethical way to deal with beggars? Say, for example, Hyderabad has a lot of beggars. So what is the best way to deal with beggars? Dear students, please. What is the best way? Okay, let me tell you. Say, for example, beggars. When you see beggars, say, for example, in Hyderabad, think that hypothetical, some 100 people, 100 beggars are there. Don't worry. You are true, they are more. Hypothetical, 100 beggars are there. They're always roaming on the street. They're asking for money. So here, those people who are soft-hearted, they feel very pity. Oh my God, these people, they don't have anything. So by that, they are increasing pain. It's not pleasurous thing. On the other hand, some are there arrogant. After seeing that, they become very angry. You might have seen some people, why you are begging, come to my house, I will give you work. They're arrogant. So in both the cases, it is decreasing the utility. It is making the people pain, more pain. So what is the best method? The best method is to confine these beggars into some place. To confine these beggars into one place. Then there may be counter argument saying that this is one which is not according to utilitarian principle, because if you confine people into one place, you have to give food, bed, and all the accessories things you have to give. Who will pay for this? Ordinary citizens. So citizens are paying. When you are making the citizens to pay the money, their happiness decreases. Then can we take this criteria from the utilitarian point of view? Here, from the utilitarian point of view, when we consider, we have come to one conclusion of keeping the beggars in one place. For that, who will give bed, who will give lodging, boarding, all supports, their health, everything? It has to be from public money. So citizens are made to pay. Because of that, these 100 people may be little happy, but rest of the public are not that happy. If we add up the thing, if there is more happiness, then you can go for this. Bentham devised a beautiful idea for that also. He said that there is no need for public to pay for that. We will create a workplace, workshop here, where the beggars will be made to work. They will have their insurance, they will have their medical bill, everything taken care. And also they will having a bank account. You will be, all the beggars will be made to work. The money which they earn will be deposited into their bank account. From this, the insurance, their medical expenses, from their lodging, everything will be taken off. The extra money, if it is left, will be given. Don't you feel this is a good idea? Then there was another question. Okay, Bentham, what you said was good. Then how will you accommodate? See, you are putting all the beggars in one place. There is more variety, more diversity among the beggars. How can you accommodate those things? So for that, beggar says, say for example, there is one beggar who is fond of or who is shouting always. So you give a house, a room to such person beside a person who cannot hear anything, deaf and deaf. So this won't be disturbing the other. See, here in all these aspects, please look into the utilitarian thing. Let me just sum up the things. Beggars. So allowing beggars on the street will create less utility. Utility here means happiness, because more number of the people will be unhappy and only few beggars they will be allowed to roam around, so they will be little happy. So from the utilitarian point of view, you cannot leave beggars on the street, because happiness is decreasing at the aggregate level. So what is the best way? You have to place them in one place. Here, if you place and give all the amenities once again from the public, once again the utility will be less. So the beggars should be kept in one place and they should be made to work. From that money, they have to be on a subsistence basis, they have to be paid with respect to everything. So by this, the total utility of the society will be the highest. The total happiness of the society will be highest. So according to Bentham, allowing beggars to beg on the street has got negative utility. It is not ethical. So what is the ethical thing? To confine them into workplace. Let me explain these things in a systematic way. Encountering beggars on the street, reduces happiness of the passerbys. For tender-hearted souls, smooth-hearted soft-hearted soul. The sight of beggars produces pain of sympathy. For tender-hearted, pain of sympathy. For hard-hearted folk, it generates pain of disgust, angriness. So by that, reduces the utility of the general public. Allowing the workers on the street reduces the general utility. So he proposed removing beggars from the streets and confining them to workhouses. Very important, workhouse. This is the key thing, because all other things general you can write. So they have to be made to work in workhouses. Then, as I told, confining the beggars into workhouses. What are the objections? Some beggars would be happier begging than working in the workhouse. Cost of building, running the houses. See here, in this case, some beggars may be happier begging. So this also you have to take into consideration. And also cost of these things. How to overcome this? So the argument that some beggars would be happier begging than working in a workhouse. The sum of the pains suffered by the public is greater than whatever unhappiness felt by the beggars, because they are few. The cost of building and running the houses, for this each beggar would have to work to pay off the cost of his maintenance. Then what about the rooming arrangement? Confining beggars in the workhouse. How is the rooming arrangement? Next to every class, station a class of unsusceptible of that inconvenience. Next to every class, station a class unsusceptible of that inconvenience. Next to a person who talk more, place a deaf and dumb. Next to prostitutes or loose women, place aged women. Next to shockingly deformed, place blind. These are the exact words given by Bentham. So what are the limitations of utilitarianism? Can anyone try the limitations? First, I have put it failed to respect the individual rights. What are the limitations of utilitarianism? Or what are the limitations of consequentialism in broad? Please think it over. Here, you are locating ethical standards in the consequences. If the consequences are good, say for example, happiness, then you are taking this as supreme ethical standard. Please think it over. Please give one or two. What happens if you are locating ethics in the outcomes, in the consequences? Then all the people will be Robin Hoods. They will loot some place and they will distribute among the poor.
It may deprive people of justice.
People of justice. Like how? Can you please elaborate? Good one.
Like similarly, like if we are only focusing on the consequences, then in between we are not caring about the amount of people who are suffering or being looted. Only thing is the end result. If somebody is happy, it means it's a good result. But what about the people who suffered in between?
Okay, like that is the thing, failed to respect individual rights, but don't feel this is the thing. There are 1,000 people, 5 are suffering, rest are happy. You want to sacrifice the happiness of 995 people for the sake of 5 again? What is wrong in making 2 people suffer?
Like that is misunderstood form of happiness.
Okay, but you cannot put that because you are not understanding happiness. Happiness is already understood as the net result of pleasure or pain. You may say that that is not the correct way of taking that as an ethical standard. Happiness, you cannot equate that to something good Are you getting? So happiness cannot be equated to something good. The outcome can, if it is good, it cannot be equated to something ethical. That's the way you can go ahead. Individual respects, it failed to respect individual rights. Yes, true. Give the example where you can have given ample example. A common currency of value. Next limitation, all values cannot be captured by the common currency of value. Example, cost benefit analysis, a form of decision making by translating all costs and benefits into monetary terms and then comparing them. Here, the problem is there is no common currency with respect to measuring the outcomes. Say, for example, in society, there may be hundreds of outcomes. To compare that, you should have a common currency. The best method available is cost benefit analysis. This we cannot do to all. Let me take some of the examples here. Smoking is profitable. If you take the cost benefit analysis, it was found that it was not like a assumption. It is through experiment, through process, it is found that smoking is profitable. Why? Number one, you'll be getting taxes. You'll be getting money, government will be getting money. And also, people who smoke, say for example, they won't be living after 60. Means all the insurance, all the medical bills, all these things are gone. And also, above 60, after 60, what these people will do? We say, we talk about demographic dividend, and we consider people who are above 60 or 70 to be burden on the society. So if you take the net utility, don't feel smoking is profitable. Smoking is giving more utility. It is giving more happiness to the whole society. Smokers, lot of tax. At the same time, they won't be living after 60 or 70. So all insurance, medical claims, all this over. Not only that, even if you're living after 60 or 70, you will be burdened to the society. You won't be in a way productive. You're not a youth. You cannot take this. This was the thing. Philip Morris, the tobacco company, conducted a survey in Czech Republic. The study found that the government actually gains more money than it loses from smoking. The net gain to the treasury was to the tune of 147 millions per year. So this tobacco company conducted a study in that it found that smoking was profitable. There was another example. Exploding gas tanks are economical. Exploding gas tanks was economical. Long before, the Ford company had a car. In that, the rear part of the car used to have gas cylinder here. Whenever there's a collision from behind, it used to explode. It used to explode. The car used to explode. So it was found that after experiment, for placing some protection to this gas tank, they are losing more. The company is losing more. And it is in fact gaining if it is left as it is. Let me explain this. During 1970s, Ford Pinto was one of the best-selling subcompact cars in the United States. Unfortunately, its fuel tank was prone to explode when another car collided with it from the rear, from behind. Ford estimated that 180 deaths and 180 burn injuries would result if no changes are made. So 180 will be dying, and 180 injuries. 2 lakh per life, the amount they fixed, and 67,000 per injury. Overall benefit of the safety improvement would be, so if you place the safety equipment, overall benefit according to this logic, by giving value to one individual's death and injury, it is just about 49.5 million. But the cost of adding $11 device to 12.5 million vehicles would be 137.5 billion. So here, if you take the utilitarian angle, it is economical and it is good if you don't fit the device which can protect, because you are thinking about the net utility. So there is a problem of common currency of value. You cannot match and you cannot put the things in the same value. So these are the two major limitations. This was overcome, or one person who tried to overcome these two limitations was John Stuart Mill. He was a great individual. He was a very, very great individual. Reviving Bentham's doctrine. So he thought of reviving Bentham doctrines. Bentham has these two major lacunae. It failed to respect individual rights, and also there was a problem of common currency of value. Dear students, can I take class for another half an hour? Is it okay to all? If can I extend for another 30 minutes? Okay, not a problem. I'll just take another 5 to 10 minutes and I will leave you after that, right? Because this John Stuart Mill thing is interesting. I won't be explaining the thing as of now. Bentham things are clear to you. He has got two limitations, that is, failed to respect individual rights and common currency of value. This was the problem. These things were overcome by John Stuart Mill. A very, very interesting thing about Mill. J.S. Mill was a son of James Mill. He was a son of James Mill. This James Mill, a friend and disciple of Bentham. So this is your James. His father, John Stuart Mill. His father, James Mill, was a friend of Bentham, friend and also disciple. James Mill's homeschooled his son, homeschooling. The young Mill, Stuart Mill, became a child prodigy, very, very expert. John Stuart Mill studied Greek at the age of 3. The students, you think it over. You might have seen and heard. By 3 years, he read Greek, Latin at 8. At the age of 11, he wrote a history of Roman law, not any simple story fiction. He wrote the history of Roman law. When he was 20, he suffered a nervous breakdown. How painful it is, my dear students. See, such a upbringing. By 3 years, Greek, not that easy. By 8 years, Latin. By 11 years, he wrote a very, very important thing with respect to Roman law. Maybe is the things which he has to do for 60 years, he did all the things in 20 years. So he got burst, which led him depressed for several years. Shortly after he met Harriet Taylor. She was a married woman at that time with 2 children, but she and Mill became close friends. When her husband died 20 years later, she and Mill married. Mill created Taylor as his greatest intellectual companion and collaborator, as he says about reviving Bentham's doctrine. So by 20 years, Stuart Mill almost gone, nervous breakdown. Then he comes in contact with Harriet Tyler, a very good woman, but she was married. So they were in a very good way, they were friends. But after the death of the husband, so they got married. And in fact, Stuart Mill says that he was able to apply the things what he has already done. By 20 years, he know everything. By his interaction with the Tyler, there was a many important things which changed. So these and many more we'll take up tomorrow. Dear students, hold on, and if you have got any doubt with respect to the things I have taught till now, any part, if you have, please let me know.
Sir, I had a doubt.
Please go ahead.
In the previous you said that $11 by fixing a $11 device, it cost me every around 135 millions.
Akhil, little bit be loud. Your voice is breaking and it's not continuous.
Sir, isn't it inhuman that for sake of money, I'm
Yes.
letting people die for $11?
Yes, that is the thing. That was one of the problem. That was the problem. So this was the limitation of Bentham's things. So this will be overcome by Stewart. Definitely it will be inhuman. That is the reason why we said there is no common currency of value. So there was no common currency with respect to measuring the things. We cannot equate death to $2 lakh. That was the limitation.
Thank you.
Right? Any other doubt, my students?